Welcome to another edition of Fast and Simple Development. Today we're going to talk about Google Charts. So we're going to work with Spring Boot and create a Spring Boot application using Thymeleaf to display a Google chart. So let's jump into it. We're going to start another Spring Boot application, and Spring Boot is a nice environment that I really enjoy for Java. You can go to spring.io to learn all about the great things, and it's created through Pivotal Lab and the new owner, VMware. So this is a VMware product, nice support, very stable, works well with Java. I focus on Java 1.8 for most of my development. You can go to Spring Initializer, or I'm going to actually use IntelliJ and Ultimate. IntelliJ Ultimate has a Spring Initializer built into it. So I'm going to use IntelliJ to create my project. And in this new project, I'm going to call it Fast and Simple Charts. I'm going to create it using Java, Maven. I'm going to give it a reverse domain name for my consulting company, Thomas J Consulting. So I will be found at thomasjconsulting.com. And it's going to use the name in the package name that's created. So I'll get com.thomasjconsulting.fast and simple charts. I'm using Java 1.8. I'm using the Java 8 environment, and I'm creating a jar. So now I'm going to go to Next, and here I'm going to create this using Spring Boot 2.77. I'm not ready to go to Spring Boot 3.0 yet, since I'm using Java 8. I'm going to add in Lombok. I'm going to go to Web and add in Spring Web. And I'm also going to add in a template engine. In this case, I'm going to add Thymeleaf. So this will go ahead and create a project. And I now have a new project here. So I'm going to close the help file. And we're going to go down and we can see that Fast and Simple Charts was created. I have a POM file. That's because we use Maven. And in this POM file, we have Thymeleaf, we have Spring Boot Web, and we have Lombok. Okay, so that should be all we need from the POM file. We shouldn't need to add anything else. In the source, we have a main folder, and in here we have our Java code. It generated this Java Spring Boot application for us. We won't have to be modifying that right now. And we have a resource folder. In that resource folder, we have a template, and that's where the templates for the Thymeleaf are found, and we have an application properties. So let's go ahead and run the Spring Boot application, such as it is. There's not a whole lot to it, but let's go ahead and see what we have. We're going to enable the Lombok processing. It will start the application. And we can see this is listening to port 8080. So one of the first things I'm going to do here is I want to change what port that's listening to. And I'm going to go to our application properties. I'm simply going to say server.port equals 3100. I'm going to save that. I'm going to hit the play to start the server again. And I see we're now listening on port 3100. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the red stop button to stop that. And we're going to continue on. And let's create our first web page. To do that, we need to create that in the templates directory. I'm going to go ahead and stop the application properties. And I'm going to create a new HTML page. And I'm going to call that index.html. So in our index.html that we've created, we have a title and an empty body. So let's change our title, and I'm going to call this Google Chart. I'm going to add in the body a simple H1 and say Google Chart. Here, there we go. Okay, so we have our basic HTML page. Nothing is really going on yet. So now how do we actually tie that HTML page into Spring Boot on Thymeleaf? So this is going to be a Thymeleaf page since it's out of the templates. We're going to go to our base package. We're going to add another package called controller. in Spring Boot, you have various controllers, and one of the controllers you can create, I'm going into the controller package, and I'm going to create a new Java class. I'm going to call that main web controller. So a lot of times you'll have web controllers or just controllers and REST controllers. In this case, it's just a controller. So I'm going to add in an annotation for controller. And this is going to make this a controller. The component scan within Spring Boot will go through and look for the various components defined. And this is defined as a controller. If we mouse over this, we'll actually see that it was defined as a component. So it'll come up in the component scan. So the controller is a component. So that will be brought into Spring Boot. And Spring Boot on startup will know about this. That's great. Now that we have our basic controller here, what we need to do is add some very simple mapping information in here. And we can add in a mapping for our index. And that mapping is going to be as simple as a get for the index page. So again, through annotations, we're going to add in a get mapping. And in this case, I don't need to put anything in here. Sometimes I would, but since it's going to be the base of everything, I can just put in here slash, and then we need to define a method. So I'm going to say public string. I'm just going to call this index, since this is in fact the index page. And I'm going to return the word index in string. What this is going to do is going to map this request through Thymeleaf to load the Thymeleaf template index.html. So let's run this now. We'll see the Spring Boot starts. And now let's go up to HTTP localhost 3100. And let's see if that loads our index.html page. So let's open up a browser here. We talked about the Spring Initializer. We did our Spring Initializer through IntelliJ, through the Ultimate Edition. And in the Spring Initializer, we loaded Thymeleaf. We added Thymeleaf, Spring Web, and also Lombok. So let's actually go through and try our site now at http://localhost:3100. Look, Google chart here. So now we have this. We have our title, and we have our H1 tag. So now we have the basics of Thymeleaf set up to redirect. Although this still isn't a Thymeleaf page. So our next step is we're going to add some Google Charts into this. So Google Charts will allow us to put a chart into this framework using their JavaScript in Thymeleaf. And we can go through, and I've selected line charts here. We're going to create a line chart to start with. And we can go through and look at various line charts, and there's examples, etc. And there's some code here. And this code here, I'm actually going to grab it. So we don't need the head part. We do need the JavaScript. And this JavaScript right here allows us to load in some of the chart loader. So we're going to go back to our package in our JavaScript. And we're going to add that in the head section. I'm going to put that after the head. I'm going to go back to our Google Charts, and we have some additional information in here, and we're going to bring it down here and copy that. We'll go back into our Thymeleaf, and we will put that into, again, the head section, and we'll go back into our example, and it has a div here in the body. So I'm going to copy that div. All right, so let's copy that into here. So let's go into the body section, and I will paste that right here. Let's stop our server, restart our server, and see if we have any Google Charts. Look, that's simple. Now we have a Google chart. We didn't have to do anything. Everything's up and running. No fancy coding. But there's lots of additional things that we could get to. This is a curved line. Maybe we want to have a little bit better structured line. Let's see if we can do that. Let's go through and let's just add in here on a cohort a line. And this go through and let's remove the options, the curve type, and let's remove the legend at the bottom. We've set the chart type. Let me change that to chart line for the HTML, and we'll put it in chart line. We can set our size in here for the height and width, or we can also put it in the options. I'll leave it here in the div for right now. So let's go run this again, and let's see if our chart changed a little bit. Now we have a line chart. And if we mouse over our various points, we can actually see the values. And then we can see the description for the color lines. Let's go back and make a few little changes here. I want to take this data and load it in from a service. So I'm going to change how the data is generated. So instead of creating an array, I'm going to create another data element here. I will then go through and add an array column, and this is adding some definitions for the columns in here. So I have one date and one for name for Tom. I will delete the data visualization in here, and I will then add some data rows and some content in this data. Okay, so now we have some data in here, and let's go ahead and start this. And see how it looks. Now we can see our data is in here, and we have 3 points, and it shows up on our chart. This is great. We have the basics of the chart working, but how do we actually tie it in? So I've gone to Google Charts, and we have the basic information to set up a line chart. We can actually set up multiple lines on this chart, and let's go over how to do that real quick. I can add another column in here. Let's add one for Fred. And I can quickly add some other values in here. 5, 2, 0. And let's restart this and see if we can actually see new values for Fred in here by simply adding another column and another data set. Let's refresh the chart. I see another column in here. So we can very quickly add another data set, and I can see the color is automatically selected. So the first one is blue, the second one appears to be red. Great, so now we have our basic chart working, but we haven't actually fed data from our application. So how can we do that? In Spring Boot, you typically would have a controller, and if you have data, that would normally be facilitated from a service. So let's create a package called service, and let's create a class within that, and let's call it graph data service. So we'll create that, and we want to do some annotations so Spring knows about it. We're going to call it a service. It has a service annotation, and again, this is based off a component, so it will automatically get scanned in through the component scan. So now we have this service here, and I can actually go through and create a simple method in here. I'm going to call it public something, and right now I'm just going to call it an object. I'm going to call it get graph data, and I'm going to return null right now. So I can then go through on our web controller, and I can use AutoWire, and I can load this graph controller in here. Let me import him. And now I can actually pull the data in here. I can use this, and I can very quickly go through in the controller, and I can create a model, and the model will be sent to Thymeleaf. So now we have a model in here, and the model we can actually set various attributes. So one of the things I want to set in here is going to be the graph name. And we'll call this graph title. So right now, if we go to our web page, our graph title is company performance. So let's change that. Special graph. All right. So now we have a special graph, and this model attributes are going to be passed to Thymeleaf. So let's go into the Thymeleaf and see if we can get access to that data in there. We're going to want to access this data as an HTML variable. So I have a title right here, and this title is going to be the first one I look at. I'm going to set that as special graph. So in here, I can add in a th:\text. And for that text, I can define what it's going to be. Before I can use these attributes like th:\text, I have to add in something to the HTML to reference Thymeleaf. I need to add in a reference to the Thymeleaf namespace, and that's as simple as adding in thymeleaf.org in the HTML. Once I have this in here, I can actually start using it. So down in our title on the HTML, we can have our th:\text and put in the reference to the title. And here we'll have $ and open curly brackets. So in this case, we created a graph title. And let's run this now and see if that gets populated. So right here it says Google chart here. Now it says special graph. All right, that's a start. But we want the special graph down here where we see special company performance. So let's actually change this title to be graph page title and call this graph page title. Great. So we can call this here special graph page. Now we know exactly what we're doing here. Now we still want to have a graph title. So we'll go back and say graph title, and we'll say special graph. Now in our Thymeleaf page, what we'll want to do is add some information in here specifically for the title. So we have the title right here. So to make this work, we need to go into our Thymeleaf template and add in the th inline to JavaScript. Make sure you don't have a typo in there. And then in the title, we're going to add in a /*, open square bracket, graph title, close square bracket, /*, quote, quote. What this is Thymeleaf supports natural templates, which means you can view this template without Thymeleaf. So technically, you could run this as a normal browser without having to have the Thymeleaf interpreter. This way, HTML designers and writers can quickly go through and add functionality that you can go back and add Thymeleaf tags to this. So we've gone through and we added in the TH text into the graph title page, but we also have our placeholder text here, which doesn't show up. So let's go ahead and run this now and see what it looks like. So we now have our special graph page. We have a special graph, which is a title. Okay, we're making some progress here. A couple of things we can do. We've added Lombok into this, but we don't really have any information on the logging. Through the magic of Lombok, we can actually add in SL4J. And this will allow us to add some logging in here. And I'll just say index started. And I'll say index completed. I can also add in the SL4J into the service. And the same thing in the service right here. I can specify a log info. And I can say my get graph data started. And the same thing I'm going to say completed. All right, so now we stop this and we run it here. We can see a little bit more logging information in here and see some of the benefits that we're getting from the log4j. Okay, so we have the start of our index page. So let's take the next step. Let's add some information in here to actually show in our graph. Right now our graph data is static. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the titles to replace Data, Tom, and Fred. So in this case, we're going to add in here, just like we did before. This is going to be our first data set. We're going to call this, there's what we're going to call column 1. And this one we're going to call column 2. Now from within our model, we can set column 0. Let's call this your date. Column 1, let's call this Tom. Column 2, let's call this Sam. Okay. Then over here, technically, we could leave this blank, but I'm just going to call it column 0, column 1, column 2. Now for our data, we have some data in here, but it would be very nice to have that data replaced as well. So let's go ahead and replace that data out of here. And what we're going to do is add in something a little special for Thymeleaf to determine this. So I'm going to add in our row data. And what this is going to do is usually Thymeleaf each operator. So we need to have something called chart data we pass in, and it's going to iterate through for each row and set this. So we need to set our chart data. The chart data needs to be modeled in here. And where do we think we're going to get this chart data? We're going to get it from the graph service that we created. We're going to call get graph data. So now we can go through and populate this graph data. There's a couple different ways we can do that, but to make this simple, I'm going to simply make this a list of some data, and then I need to change the return type to be a list. So we're going to return an array as a list, 2, 2, and then 4 and 4 for 2 different dates. Let's see how this looks. Oh, look at that. We have various data points in here. We have 2 data points. Let's go ahead and let's add a 3rd data point. The 3rd data point, we have a little more data. So we have our basic chart running. That's it. Please take a look at my other channels. I have Medium, I have Udemy, and we have all sorts of information